what did you think of the new Beatles song?
Listen, I seem to be, it's not a universal view, but I love it.
I
And
love it too.
yeah,
I,
I wrote a whole article about, a review of it and a whole,
oh, I haven't read your review yet.
yeah. So,
To look at that.
but I mean, all kinds of people who I thought would love it, don't, and including my sister-in-law. But as my wife said, my sister-in-law, Alexandra, was never that much of a Beatle fan anyway, so who cares what
Yeah.
she thinks? But no, I listen, it brought tears to my eyes, and for me, it was, in fact, you'll be interested in this. I changed. I mean, I didn't change. I put a couple of lines in my novel about that song because when I finished the novel, I had
I
to.
was wondering. I was wondering if that would cause you to update anything.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
no,
I like it too. It's a good song, and they actually played it, I think, very short, very almost immediately after it came out. The local radio played it, and I was in the car and just chanced to hear it because our local radio station, they were actually they're big fans of 1960s music and so on. They're not an oldie station, but they play a lot of that music, and they were also really no, they did not ever have the Beatles live. They sort of missed. I mean, the Beatles were literally, they were playing in Hamburg, which is maybe 1.5 hours away, and there's even a museum dedicated to them in Hamburg at that time there. So and actually a lot of the 1960s 60s music performances are from what is our local radio and TV stations, because they had this program called Beat Club and later Musikladen, which still exists in some form, but now it's radio. And so all of the big bands were there, but I think they only ever had videos of the Beatles. They never had the Beatles live, but they had pretty much everybody else.
Have you ever been to that location? Is that club still
The club is no
cave?
longer there. The Star Club.
No.
There were also several clubs. It wasn't just the Star Club. It was Indra and so on. I mean, the St. Pauli, of course, the Reeperbahn and Große Freiheit. Those streets are still there. It's no longer quite as. But I think the St. Pauli that people see in the movies and so on, I'm not sure if it ever really existed in reality. At any rate, it did not exist in my lifetime. But there's still some really bars which look like they're from the era. And well, if you visit me, I can take you there. I'll take you to the Golden. I don't think the Beatles were ever in the Golden Glove, but the Golden Glove has a serial killer who was a regular there. And it's the kind of bar, the kind of traditional St. Pauli bar, which is sadly, a lot of the traditional stuff, it's gone. It's no longer quite as it used to be because times have changed.
All right, next time.
Also, St. Pauli as well. The one with where you actually have the prostitutes in the windows is Herbertstrasse. And of course, there was just an article recently about George Harrison losing his virginity in some back room of it wasn't even Star Club. It was Indra, or it was a lesser club. And George Harrison losing his virginity in the back room to apparently one of the ladies of Herbertstrasse.
I love it. You know what?
Yeah.
I am. So this is recording. I think I'm serious. Sometime like in the next couple of weeks, I'll publish just also this brief discussion we're having about Now and Then. Not that we're experts in
Well,
that.
let me add what my input on it on a musical side. My son Jeremy is really into the Beatles, and he heard an interview with, or read of an interview, maybe saw on video on YouTube, Carlos Castaneda talking about it. And he was critical of it as being overproduced and overdeveloped, like that the original demo that John Lennon had done was kind of some simple and somber, and that McCartney couldn't resist adding all like new bass licks and also and orchestration and everything. So I first saw it with the video, the YouTube video of it that Peter Jackson had put together, which I thought was very clever. And I thought, well, that's hard to evaluate it based on that. So then I listened to it later, just in headphones, and really, really listened to it. And I disagree with Castaneda, because to me, what McCartney did to it is just gorgeous, and it doesn't detract from the feeling of it at all. If anything, it enhances the feeling of it. So that's my take.
Well, I agree with you completely. And as a matter of fact, the only thing I wish I could have heard more clearly, I don't even know if that's the best word, in this recording, is indeed McCartney and Ringo's voice or voices. They're mixed so well into the track that the harmony almost sounds like an instrument in and of itself, and that's nice. But I prefer what they sounded like in 1995 when they did Real Love and Free as a Bird, where you could hear their voices more individually. But
I'll have to
that,
listen to those again, just to compare.
yeah.
Yeah.
But it's a beautiful song. I mean, I saw, and I don't know if you've read any of the reviews. Some of the critics were basically complaining about the lyrics, that, I think it's a pretty good lyric, and, it makes its point. I've heard other people complain about Lennon's voice, that it sounds robotic almost, but I think his voice sounds fine, and I'm glad to hear it. The one point, though, I'll also make is, I don't think this has to be the last Beatles song. Now, obviously McCartney and Ringo are not getting any younger, but my understanding is there are, I don't know exactly how many, but more than 2 or 3 various tracks that were recorded over the years, songs that were written that they never brought into the studio. And, so we might not have seen, or heard the end of this, which I think is great, because I'll just tell you one thing. When I was going for my PhD, and so we're talking about the mid-70s, and I wrote an essay about music and art as part of the program. It was a requirement. And in that essay, I used the Beatles. So this is like, the mid to late 1970s. I used the Beatles as an example of music that was going to last as long as Shakespeare has lasted.
Oh, they definitely will. Maybe people probably were skeptical by the mid-70s, but I think it was already pretty clear by the. I mean, Beatles songs were being sung on Sesame Street, which is how I actually encountered them first. I remember John Lennon dying, and everybody was very upset that I said, like, okay, it's sad, someone was shot. Apparently he was a singer, but I don't know. And then and they all played Yesterday, which I wasn't that familiar. I mean, that was 1980, so I would have been 7. I wasn't that familiar with Yesterday. But then I heard, oh, he's the guy he did Octopus Garden and Yellow Submarine. Of course, it's great music, because that's how I first encountered them. Because my parents didn't have a record player at the time. They only got their. I mean, they probably had something earlier, but they didn't have a record player when we got our first one, which is theoretically mine in 1978. And I still have it, but I need to get a decent modern record player, because that thing only works when it wants to. Yeah, I mean, it's still wet, obviously, but yeah, that's also, I mean, here in Germany, in northern Germany, you sometimes still meet people who actually met the Beatles when they were playing in Hamburg. People who went to the clubs and so on. My parents, unfortunately, never went to the clubs in Hamburg. My mother wasn't the type for that, and my dad probably might have, but it was probably a little bit too rough for him. I don't know, but he never went to the clubs in Hamburg. But there's still people here in the 70s and 80s who've actually met them when they were playing in the Star Club way before they were famous.
Yeah, I think, Germany doesn't receive enough credit. I mean, everyone knows that they were in Hamburg, and, Stu Sutcliffe, was with them, and that's where Astrid, his wife, got to know him. Did they actually get married, or were they just boyfriend and girlfriend? I'm not sure. Astrid.
I think I'm not sure either if they're married.
Yeah.
She does show up in German documentaries about the Beatles a lot.
Yeah.
Because of course she's easy to it's easy to interview her.
Yeah.
I think they were engaged, but didn't get around to getting married.
Yeah, I think you're
By
right.
the way, I just self-edited myself. I think I said Carlos Castaneda instead of
That's
Carlos
okay.
Santana.
That's Santana.
Yeah, that was a bit weird. I thought like
I
Castaneda,
like that,
and
though.
since when is he?
It's
But
such-
okay, why shouldn't he be into music?
It's weird that
Carlos Santana makes
cycle.
more sense.
It
Actually,
didn't strike me when I said it at all. But like a couple minutes later, did I actually say Castaneda?
No,
I
that's
did.
good. Look, we're going to be talking soon about science fiction, so it's okay to bring.
Yeah,
in
that
some
would be.
alternate reality. It might have been Castaneda.
There's,
Okay, but
yeah, really.
I love it.
yeah. Also, yeah. I mean, there were a lot of the Beatles weren't even the only band. There's been sort of a one-way or two-way pipeline between Liverpool and also Blackpool and Hamburg. Hamburg's the booking agents for the Hamburg clubs and also sometimes for TV programs and so on. Went to Liverpool and also to Blackpool to look at bands, but also variety acts, comedy acts, and so on, and get them to Germany. That's how the Beatles came here because, and they're not the only ones. Everything, for example, every New Year's Eve there's on TV they show a skit from the early '60s called Dinner for One about which is a comedy skit. I think it's originally from the 1920s and has been played in Blackpool on the pier for 40 years. Well, a Hamburg booking agent saw it and got them to Germany to perform it on TV, and now it's a holiday classic. And of course, the people involved were not young then, and you can see that they must have been born before 1900. But the Beatles weren't the only one. It's also several. I think what was the Quarrymen? No, what was the name of the band? There was another band which is quite famous, but it was an exchange because it's both were port cities, and there was a lot of traffic, and they also trafficked musicians along with the goods and the cargoes.
Considering how much British culture and history is owed to Germany, with the royalty coming from Germany and all that stuff. It's
the
good
royalty could still get a German passport if they wanted to.
Yeah, it's good that the Beatles were able to give something back.
Yeah,
we got
contribute something in return.
I mean, we had some of this Beat Club program, which started in 1965, was one of the earliest modern pop music programs in Germany, and they kept because of course there were a lot of programs in the UK, Ready Steady Go and Top of the Pops, but the UK, the BBC threw a lot of tapes out. They kept all the tapes, so now they have, and the station Radio Bremen, which is a fairly small radio and TV station, they make a shitload of money licensing all of those wonderful tapes of live performances by great stars of the 1960s, 70s, and early 80s.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Fatherland, one of the things that sold that book here in America is they had posters advertising the book, and it would say Das Beatles in this alternate reality in which Germany won the Second World War. So there definitely is a powerful connection between the Beatles.
Well, I mean, we probably would have still, with alternate histories, it's always a bit iffy, and some of the things are, for example, when the Man in the High Castle, when they played this Edelweiss song, I was like, that song wouldn't have existed. Sorry, Rodgers and Hammerstein were huge. If they'd gotten very lucky, they would have survived, but they wouldn't have played, and the Traps probably wouldn't have survived either, because the Nazis didn't get it. That's why they fled. The Nazis didn't get along. They would have killed them. Or at least the parents, not the children, I hope, but you never know with them. It's the Beatles, they probably would have existed, even if the music would have been a little different.
Yeah, no, absolutely right. Well, this Edelweiss was a really brilliant choice on the part. I guess it was Spotnitz, who he basically was the creator of the whole series. He worked on the series for maybe the first 2 or 3 years, and then he left. But I always thought it was brilliant because it was consistent with the turning everything upside down that Philip K. Dick did anyway, because you're right. In our reality, Edelweiss is a song that's protesting the German Anschluss of Austria, taking over Austria right before the Second World War. And here it is in The Man in the High Castle on Amazon, being in effect the theme song of Germany taking over.
Yeah, okay, that's probably why they chose it. It was just that I thought like, okay, but that's also in Germany we're not very familiar. I know The Sound of Music, but it's rarely shown because there was a movie about the same story based on Maria von Trapp's book, made a few years earlier in Germany, and that's the one that gets shown every Christmas and so on. And so the American one is just always, what is this American sing, and why is everything so, and why is and they sing the traditional songs in the not the Rotzers Hammerstein songs in the German one. So this is a bit so this is something that I also associate with. It's kind of very American, trying to be not trying to be Austrian. And okay, of course, also the St. Pauli neighborhood of Hamburg was not exactly resist, but they were, let's say, the Nazis kind of never really penetrated the culture there, because it's they do their own thing there. It's also some people, as for example, a woman, Marie de Nedja, she was a German actress and singer, and she's still alive. She must be around 90 by now. And she was black. She was a black German, the daughter of one of the ladies of St. Pauli, and apparently a black sailor, and she survived the Nazi era, and she actually acted in some films at the time. She survived the Nazi era in St. Pauli, because first of all, there were no real. There were too few black people that there were no official orders what to do about them, and the local police just wasn't very interested in arresting some random black girl who sometimes danced in the clubs and sang in the clubs and worked in a factory. And also, I don't know if you've seen, it's a German movie, Große Freiheit Große Freiheit is a street it's also a street where the Beatles played in one of the clubs. It's a street in St. Pauli. It means great freedom, and it's a certain, and there's a movie made in the 1940s, just before Hamburg was badly bombed, and this is St. Pauli, which no longer exists, and it's and it was actually filmed in some of the real clubs at the time, which no longer exist, and is a story about a singing sailor who meets a young woman and falls in love with her, but she falls in love with a guy who works at the Blumenfoss shipyard, where my dad also worked for a while. And the Blumenfoss, and I have the real locations, and it's just simply great to. And the amazing thing is in the background, and this is a movie made in, I think, 1942 or 43. So it's the height of the Third Reich. You see people of color in the background. You see black people, and you see Asian people. They go for dinner in a Chinese restaurant, because Hamburg had a Chinatown for a while, and the Nazis did kind of destroy that one, because they did not like that the Chinese people had German wives, because of course, where else should they find wives? Also, you can still find people in St. Pauli who've been living there forever who are partially Chinese or something. Yeah, so okay, the Beatles, if they'd ended up in St. Pauli, they probably would have happened, and they also would have gotten to make their music. So of course the history of rock music probably would have been different, simply because the Nazis really didn't like jazz, swing, anything.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so it's fascinating.
Can I just bring it back before we leave this topic of the Beatles? To bring it back to a science fictional element of the song, which is the AI controversy, right? And how, that's so many people mistook this AI contribution of it as like, oh, it's completely imagined song, like that. What have they done to John's memory? He's rolling in his grave because they've used AI to regenerate something. But obviously, that was very well done, and it was done appropriately, in my opinion.
Was this a head recording?
What it really made me think about was what happens as AI becomes more sophisticated and more capable of creating based on training on things like Beatles songs. In the future, we could see real controversy when AI is capable of inventing new Beatles songs and having them sound as if it's really the Beatles, creating new songs. I mean, obviously, it will be clear that it's imaginative creation and not them if it's like new stuff from John and George. But I kind of look forward to some of that in one way, but I imagine it's going to be very controversial when it happens. It's not just the Beatles.
This was just this was kind of silly, this controversy, because
it
was obviously it wasn't anything. The most they just used AI to enhance an existing demo tapes. There's nothing wrong.
Yeah.
Also, I mean, posthumous collaborations. There was in the late 80s. Natalie Cole sang a duet with her father, who was long dead by that point. And no one thought that was controversial at the time. It was, everybody thought, oh, that's very beautiful. Natalie Cole gets to sing with her dad.
Yeah, well,
the history... I mean, we already have these things. That's why SAG-AFTRA has been striking to protect the likenesses of actors. And of course, we have already seen these in the Star Wars movies, where they recreated young Luke Skywalker and even recreated his voice, even though Mark Hamill is still, of course, he no longer can play as Jedi, right? But he's still alive, and he's actually a very good voice actor. And they also recreated Carrie Fisher and Peter Cushing with the permission of the families. And there was something similar done recently in Germany. I just forgot who it was. But so we already have this, and eventually we may probably get whole movies of actors who died long before they even got the chance to allow or to give permission or not.
Yeah, look, the Beatles as early as the 1960s. I mean, their early work. For example, one of my favorite early Beatles songs has always been "It's Only Love," the John Lennon song. I get high when you and I go by. My, oh my, why am I so shy? Anyway, Lennon didn't like what his voice sounded like, so George Martin brought him back into the studio, and he just overdubbed his own voice, just singing in unison. So it's really two John Lennon voices. So is that AI? No.
Yeah, but voice enhancing has been going on for a very, very long time, and also that a lot of things. I mean, a lot of the American 1960s bands never actually, they were not anymore real than the Monkees, because it was all studio musicians who were actually doing the music, which I didn't, which I wish I would have known as a teenager, because then our teachers were like, oh, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and all the 60s bands, they were real. I mean, the Beatles and the Rolling Stones did really play their music, but I was, and the first time I heard it, I was like, I wish I would have known, because I was said, oh, your music is just computers. And this was the 1980s. It was basically synthesizers and early auto-tune. They didn't have anything more. I was like, oh, your music is all false. So your singers can't really sing, and your musicians can't really play, and it's just synthesizers. And but it wasn't that different in the 60s either. Only the technology was more primitive.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. All right, we've been talking.
We want to talk about Foundation, and now we talk about the Beatles. Not that I'm against talking about the Beatles.
Okay. Listen, I'll put out this conversation. 3 experts on Foundation series on television also happen to be experts on the Beatles and the history of music and AI. So we'll have 2 separate recordings out there, both on YouTube and also as part.
That's what SFF Audio.
I deny
put all of the pre-show set out and to put them up as separate recordings before we actually talk about the book.
That's right.
I deny any special expertise on the Beatles. I'm just a big fan.
Someone who likes the Beatles and who happens to live near where they had some of their adventures, and also happens to like music of the era, and who's been not really a musician, but I played the piano and wasn't bad, but
well, I would say anyone who has ears is an expert on the Beatles.